Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, welcome to this wonderful hall here in New York. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues in the United Nations family, thank you for being here with us tonight. This is my 9th occasion in which to be able to be part of this Champions of the Earth ceremony. And I have to say, for me, it's the favorite activity that I get to do as an Executive Director in the United Nations Environment Programme. I want to begin by thanking Ian Sommerhalder and Giselle Bündchen, who have so generously contributed their time as goodwill ambassadors. I think for both of them, this term was created. They bring so much goodwill to our work. They also are such good ambassadors because both of them actually were engaged on environmental issues well before they became UNEP Goodwill Ambassadors. And in that sense, having them here with us tonight just speaks to this extraordinary community that literally can reach from one end of the planet to the other, from the arts, the world of film, into the world of science, photography. And I want to also mention this evening one more UNEP Goodwill Ambassador, Yann Arthus-Bertrand, who has just released here in the United Nations General Assembly Hall a few days ago his new film, Human. Their creative talent and commitment to speaking to the world, to helping us to communicate what sometimes is very complex science, very challenging developments on our planet, is immensely important. And Nikki, let me also welcome you this evening for being part of this. You, in your own right, have become part of this environmental storytelling, and we are grateful that you, Ian, and Nikki are going to shepherd us here through this evening and hopefully make it nothing but a joyous occasion. I should also mention that Ian and Giselle both have foundations. They have programs that work on the environment. And if you feel that we in UNEP are not doing enough, then please take a look at what they're doing, because I'm sure they would welcome your support as well. Let me also say that I cannot recognize this evening many of the distinguished leaders from within the United Nations family, from within the environmental community who are here. Please consider this evening also a thank you from us in the United Nations Environment Programme to you. We work because of what you do. We succeed or fail because of your confidence in our work, and therefore this evening is a way of saying thank you for what you do and also for what we can do with you. Some of you who will have been stuck in traffic jams just in the last 2 days may have noticed that there was a summit going on. That's the downside on, in a sense, converging every September here in New York. But it has been an extraordinary week. I think sometimes we have this privilege of seeing that idea of the United Nations, that notion that defines the Charter of the United Nations, come alive. And I had one of these moments this week. It was the morning when the President of the General Assembly and the Secretary General welcomed Pope Francis, to be followed then by the adoption of what we in our wonderful poetic UN language call the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, or as they may one day become known as the Global Goals. To have the Secretary General address the world in the presence of Pope Francis and say, "Welcome to this place," which we consider a sacred hall, was to me a reminder of the idealism and the expectation that so many held when that hall was built and became, if you want, the place where every nation can be represented. And then to hear Pope Francis speak to the world through that hall of the United Nations, to every head of state, to every citizen, yes, as the leader of the Catholic faith, but also as an intensely human being, a profound state of our world address that was the perfect rationale for why we then adopted a set of Sustainable Development Goals this week. And all of you know that goals are goals. They mean little beyond the excitement of those who have been involved in framing and negotiating them. In this case, it was, in some sense, almost millions. And to have now a set of Sustainable Development Goals as the compass for the next 15 years that every country actually acknowledges and recognizes as being part of its opportunity and responsibility, to have had millions of citizens contribute with their ideas, I feel privileged to have been part of that moment, not least because, as so many of you, we have spent decades trying to bring that notion of environmental stewardship, sustainability, into the center stage of our societal decision-making and our discussions about development. We are there. Environmental sustainability and social equity are woven alongside the economic vision of progress into these Sustainable Development Goals as never before in an international agenda. That is also a reason why tonight is meaningful. And it is meaningful because it comes just a few weeks before Paris. That moment between New York and Paris is a slightly daunting moment, because Paris is the first moment where the world will look and say, did you mean what you said in New York? Because here is the front line of actually trying to rethink our future collectively, and time is extremely precious. It is one reason why I'm particularly honored on behalf of the United Nations Environment Programme to welcome the Prime Minister of Bangladesh here this evening. Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina is a remarkable person, leading a remarkable country with a remarkable commitment to addressing something that is as existential to Bangladesh as it will in future be to many other nations. The prospect of climate change, the experience and painful experience already over decades of what could happen and can happen if you're not prepared. The prospect of that becoming worse in the future because a world is not ready to act on this is something that I'm sure has been at the core of her commitment to providing leadership within Bangladesh, including with Bangladesh developing the first ever national climate change strategy, with creating a fund and using its own resources while the world is still debating about whether it has the money and should be working together to look after its own people, to invest in being prepared for that which is inevitable, while at the same time, in her capacity as Prime Minister, as a leader of a Muslim country, speaking to the rest of the world about the necessity to act. We welcome you here this evening, Your Excellency, and are grateful that you, the people of Bangladesh, and the situation within which you find yourself have become such an audible and therefore vital voice in our search. Our celebration this evening brings together, as it has done in recent years, people and institutions who in themselves are remarkable, but also by bringing them together show what a remarkable potential we have for working. We are recognizing this evening also two leaders in business. The discussion that I think has increasingly matured, and thankfully also within the United Nations, is that business leaders and business itself is not outside, but belongs inside, because it is part of the solution or will become ever more part of the problem. We are recognizing this evening, in the first instance, Paul Polman, who I warmly welcome here. Paul, thank you for being with us this evening. And he just happens to be the CEO of Unilever. And I say that very deliberately because what we are rewarding him for this evening is not the extraordinary success he's having in making Unilever an example of what a company can do in terms of transforming itself, but we are actually recognizing him for who he is. He said this morning, yes, I might be the CEO, but I'm actually a father of 3 children. And I think that is just his way of saying that, you know, wherever I might have been, what I'm now doing, I do out of conviction. And he has shown extraordinary courage in a world of business that often doesn't reward taking such risks in leading a business into a whole new era. in committing a company and its shareholders to a transition that is by no means unambitious. But he also finds time wherever he goes to be himself and to live up to his ideals of being a force for good and change. When he travels as a CEO of Unilever to Kenya, for example, I don't know how much time you have on Unilever business. I see you assembling a whole group of mini entrepreneurs, small and medium-scale enterprises that you as Unilever work with, and that becomes the stage to which you invite people to your evening reception. A dinner that he organized and that I attended was another occasion on one of his visits, when in fact it was a fundraiser to buy braille machines, because this is in his 27th hour of the day, another commitment he has to work to help the blind by working with an institution and a network in East Africa, and I think even globally, if I remember, Paul. All of this just to say that you are a human being who is exceptional, and this evening we in UNEP wish to honor you and to recognize you for having done extraordinary things, and above all to say please continue what you're doing wherever you may be, because this kind of leadership is what we all would wish would become the norm in a world of business that is still struggling sometimes to appreciate the vitality of that role. Alongside you, we are recognizing this evening another extraordinary company. Roberto is sitting here. I know Guilherme is somewhere in the hall also. It is Natura from Brazil. I had the privilege just a few days ago, because I was so intrigued by the story of Natura, to visit their headquarters in just outside Sao Paulo, and I met the founder members, I met the staff. And what we're recognizing here is not a company that started off by being an environmental company. It started off as a company of wise and enlightened young entrepreneurs who wanted to make a business working with nature. And if you then understand and follow the story of Natura, how the economic, the social, and the environmental became truly a fusion of both the idea, the vision, and the extraordinary commercial success of Natura, then you begin to appreciate that, we don't always start these journeys by design. We don't always think of everything before we start. But what we are able to do is to use success to then accept that responsibility to be more than just an enterprise that is very profitable. Natura today is not only a very significant player in the market for cosmetics in South America, it has become a global brand. It also involves 1.8 million people who earn a living by having become part of the business model of Natura. And at the same time, in the Amazon, a research center and also a whole complex approach to sharing revenues and reinvesting in the communities and in research on biodiversity, on plants, and on much of the ingenuity of nature is very much part of the way they do business. For Natura, the environment is a logical and integral part of its success story, as much as the social dimension. And this evening we want to recognize this wonderful company and its journey and the people who have made it happen, including the thousands who now work for Natura and seem to have embraced that same spirit as its original founders. My deep congratulations to you and a warm welcome here in New York. The last two of our Champions of the Earth for 2015 could not be more distant in terms of their history, their reality, and yet I want to present them both together to you because they speak in part to the power of communication, to the interest in being on the front line of an issue. We are honoring tonight the National Geographic Society, and I want to welcome its president here. Thank you very much for bringing that 100-year-plus history of the National Geographic Society to us here this evening, Gary. In both the vision of what many of us know as a magazine But actually, the National Geographic Society is so much more than a magazine. It is an idea that has grown so extraordinarily over the years that it has not only been a tool that reaches hundreds of millions of people in communication terms. And how many of you have sat in a doctor's practice or maybe in an old bus station somewhere in the world, and what do you pick up? That National Geographic magazine, that yellow thing that sticks out, and you think, I've been meaning to pick one of those up for a long time. And you know, even when they're from the 1950s or 1960s, you still read them because they have always been amazing. They have opened the eyes of people and of a world to another world that so often we struggle to understand, to appreciate, that natural world. But not only in an aesthetic sense, but also in the sense of discovering its ingenuity. Science, financing expeditions, and research have been part of the DNA of the National Geographic Society from the beginning. And through your work, and sometimes your courage also in stepping out and bringing topics into the public domain that others may not have felt comfortable, you have shaped generations of people in both their knowledge but also their passion. So tonight we honor a history of brilliant, brave pioneers who often went into areas where few others had stepped before, enduring many hardships in the name of science and of human discovery. And we hope that with this celebration this evening, we give you a message that this is the identity, the character, and the purpose that we wish to celebrate in the years to come, and we wish you great success, Gary. I said to you at the beginning that we are presenting two winners together in this category. And you know, as we all found out today, those of us who went along with the Black Mambas, they are the rock stars of this year's Champions Award. Wherever they go, people are just not only intrigued, because obviously the name Black Mambas, you know, is quite a cool name to have. But they're also astonished by Colette and Felicia, who are here tonight on behalf of this almost all-female anti-poaching unit from South Africa, because even though this is the first time in New York, it is the first time in having to stand in front of the media of, you know, an international city such as New York, and to speak about something that is about as far from the reality of most people who sit here in this room this evening as it could be. The front line of the war against poaching and illegal trade in wildlife. One of the most horrible and mean examples of environmental crime. It is actually something that is nothing but theft from societies, from future generations. It has a magnitude today that runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And on the front lines of South Africa, an unprecedented assault, particularly on rhinos, has happened in recent years. I know that we have the company of my dear friend, the Minister Edna Molewa. And you know, if there is somebody who is committed to combating this, it is Edna. And it is South Africa, and yet it cannot win against a war that is fought by environmental crime syndicates that operate internationally and have extraordinary recourse to funds, to weapons, to corruption. It is a war, sadly, that is playing out in the world, and it is bringing the rhino to the point of extinction. And into this battleground step this group of women and men in South Africa that are then baptized as the Black Mambas, unarmed but dressed to kill. Brave and committed. And I was listening to Colette and Felicia this morning, talking to some journalists and describing their journey, and you will hear in a moment in the videos them speaking about that. When we first heard about the Black Mambas, we were intrigued by it. When we then started studying their story, and I literally mean their stories, I think the 27 of you if I remember the number correctly, that are involved, we became fascinated. And when we then saw footage and listened to them and actually learned about what they're doing, we were in awe. Because this is truly bravery on the front lines. It is doing it out of a necessity, out of a conviction, and because there is a failure in our governance systems that leave, in the end, a community as the last front line that has to actually step up to face this global onslaught on wildlife. We are very proud that you are both here this evening, and I hope somewhere through our live feed, your colleagues in South Africa are also following this night's celebration, because this is, yes, about the battle on wildlife, and it is about illegal trade, but it is you wait till you hear them. You ain't seeing nothing yet. It is also about them as people, because they had very little. They had finished their education, some of them were unemployed. They embraced this, they put their lives at risk, but you will see when they speak about why they're doing it and how they're doing it, why our Black Mambas have been selected as one of the 2015 Champions of the Earth. Congratulations. Let me end my remarks by just sharing with you one notion that I would love you to take with you from here this evening. It relates to a concept that I know sounds a bit complicated, but to me it is a very powerful idiom and metaphor through which to understand both the state of where things have gotten to in our world, but also the power of people to change it. Geologists have started calling this age of ours the age of the Anthropocene. It is the age of humans, because in our capacity and in our numbers, we are literally changing the face of this planet. Our life support systems from atmosphere to biosphere. This world is changing with 7 billion people and will change even more with 10 billion people. The last 100, 200 years have been for nature and this planet a very negative balance sheet. We have literally eaten our way through many of the natural resources, vital ecosystems. We have dumped into the atmosphere amounts of pollution that are changing the atmosphere. We even created a hole in the ozone layer. But this evening's Champions of the Earth is also about the other half of this narrative. Living in the age of the Anthropocene with all the knowledge, the science, awareness, and ability to change the way we do things is the extraordinary opportunity of our time, of our generation. Because we can do things differently. And living in the age of the Anthropocene is not a notion that humanity is, by definition, a doomsday scenario for this planet. On the contrary, what we see this week here in New York, what we see all over the world, what we see also with our goodwill ambassadors, with all of you here, is when you care to know, and then when you care to act. The age of the Anthropocene could actually be the most extraordinary part in the history of this planet, because we can live on this planet together with 10 billion people. We can feed ourselves, we can provide ourselves with access to energy. We just can't do it the way we've been trying to do it for the last few hundred years. In that sense, the Anthropocene speaks to the notion that we are now the dominant species on this planet. And with it comes, whether in the terms of Pope Francis or in the terms of any of us as lay people who want to speak about ethics and responsibility, a very simple but empowering formula that our Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has used. We are the first generation that can eradicate poverty. We are perhaps the last generation that can avoid the worst consequences of climate change by acting now. To me, it's the simplest way of describing what the Anthropocene represents. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great honor to introduce our first laureate in terms of the ceremony. Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh,